Welcome to the I Love Tattooing podcast, hosted by Jack and Clay, two tattoo artists and shop owners with decades of experience working in street shops where walk-ins are always welcome.
Okay, so today Jack and I are going to discuss, in the vein of apprenticeships, who is qualified to have an apprentice. We have discussed what an apprenticeship is. We've discussed the pros and cons of apprenticeships versus schools, and this is probably the next logical evolution in this conversation. Both Jack and I have successfully taught people how to tattoo. We've also had some failures in that category, which I think we both learned a lot from. There's a lot of opinions on this subject, and there's a lot of stuff that I've recently read on social media about what it takes to have an apprentice, to be a mentor, and the expectations, and none of the comments that I've seen match the other comments. So the opinions are just wildly all over the place. First of all, I would like to say that if you are going to take on an apprentice, you should have some kind of a structured process built so that you can know where you are and you can measure the success of the journey that you're taking, both with your apprentice and yourself as being a teacher. It has to be something that you want to do. Don't do it because somebody talked you into it, and don't talk an apprentice into learning, because it needs to. I've seen that happen before. It needs to be a mutually agreed upon endeavor for all involved in order to really be successful at it. I believe that it takes at least a year to learn how to begin to tattoo. You can't ever really finish learning how to tattoo. I think in a previous conversation that we had, Jack, you said you never really finish your apprenticeship. You just get to the point where you don't need somebody looking over your shoulder anymore while you're tattooing, which I thought was a great quote. So I think, there needs to be some kind of structure and clear expectations for all involved as far as like the roles and things like that. So that, I think, is important. If you don't have that established, then are you really ready to take on the responsibility of teaching somebody how to tattoo? So with that, let's start this conversation. There's not a widely accepted agreed upon process for doing this. I think the only thing that's widely accepted, as far as I know, is that most tattooers in the business believe that an apprenticeship is the correct way to learn how to tattoo. There are plenty of self-taught tattooers that are awesome. There are probably people that have gone to tattoo schools that ended up being successful, good tattooers as well. But generally speaking, the traditional apprenticeship is the model that most people agree is the correct way to do it. It's unfortunate that we don't have a widely accepted structured process for that, but here we are.
And when you say have a widely accepted structured process, you don't mean government imposed. You mean tattoo industry
Exactly.
imposed. And I think we need to make that distinction, and people need to understand that a lot. We've talked a lot in the past about having something that's widely accepted or something standardized, and we mean self-regulating, not government imposed, because as soon as you get the government involved, it all goes to shit.
Yeah.
And I definitely agree with you. You have to have a plan when you're teaching an apprentice. You've got to have a plan so when there are certain milestones that you've met, so they can move on to the next step. And I see a lot of apprentices, a lot of people, they come to me because they're an apprentice somewhere else. They've been there for a year, and there's no guidance, there's no structure, and there's some real basic fundamentals that they were never taught. Stretching the skin is the biggest one. I don't know how you can forget to tell your apprentice that. But that's the biggest one. Or they're letting their apprentice do these giant 6-hour tattoos, and it's like I'm gonna assume that their motivation is it comes from a good place, and they do want to teach this person. They just don't know how to do it. And I followed the first person I taught. I kind of just followed the blueprint that my mentor taught me, and that was probably around 2006. I taught the first person I ever taught was Denise Craig.
Oh yeah.
And I'd been tattooing 14 years at that point. I started in 92. So there was a long time I knew that I didn't know how to teach somebody. Denise was another person that she had started an apprenticeship somewhere else in Chicago, I believe, and then it didn't work out. She moved, and then decided that she really had a passion for it, and I'm glad she did, because she's an incredible tattooer.
She really is,
and a good person, someone fun to work with. So that was cool, and I learned a lot from that. And I think you and I had talked about coming up with a plan and setting some goals and stuff for her, and that was really, really helpful. I asked one of my colleagues, a woman that I work with that's been tattooing probably about as long as we have. She's definitely over 25 years in the business. And I said, what do you think qualifies somebody to be a good teacher for tattooing? And her immediate response was, not be a bully.
Yeah.
To be patient and understanding. And that was not the answer I was expecting, but she's right.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
a major qualification. She didn't have a good apprenticeship. You know what I mean? Her old man was a tattooer, and she was basically just like thrown in. He was just like, do tattoos and then split. She was alone in the shop. She wanted to eat. She needed to figure it out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So she said that coming up was hard for her. Not a lot of women tattooers then. A lot of the guys in the town that tattooed didn't think that she was taking it seriously. They didn't take her seriously. So she had to really work hard to get accepted. And of course, then once she was accepted, they were like, man, this chick's awesome. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, she feels that as a woman, she had to work harder at it. And that might be true, probably is,
Sure.
But yeah, she's taught people, and that was her perspective, was you'll get a lot further if you're patient and understanding than you're just a bully. And I totally agree with that.
Yeah, I do too. Going back to the situation with your first apprentice, I believe at that point we had started to kind of create this documented process for training tattooers at that time.
Yes.
I did not go through a structured apprenticeship. I basically taught myself and then just learned from people that I worked with. But I did go through an apprenticeship to be a welder. So I went through an apprenticeship, just not for tattooing. And the apprenticeship that I went through was through a union, and it was definitely structured and had clear expectations for all parties involved. So I was able to use that process that I experienced in another field and apply the same structure to tattooing when we created the process that we made. And I think that helped me, because I didn't have an apprenticeship personally to look back on and use as reference for tattooing. So I had to take the structure that I knew worked for another field and put it into tattooing. And it I think was beneficial to me. And I hope that, that's something that maybe helped you some too.
Yeah. I remember, we had her writing, like a little report.
Yep.
After every tattoo she did when she got to that point. That was cool to look back on. And for a lot of people, just the act of having to think about something and write it down helps you learn.
Sure.
You know what I mean? She had to analyze what she was doing and how she felt about it. And it made her think about it more, you know?
Yeah. If I remember correctly, those little reports that we created had a critique section as well for
Right.
another artist to look at and to give some feedback, like, hey, you know, the lines aren't that strong here, or the shading's not good in this spot. Like, you didn't stretch your skin properly or hold your hand at the right angle or whatever. I think that's an important aspect, to have feedback and document it so that you can look back at it when you have a problem, when you're learning, and know that, you know, this is the problem you had before and this is how you overcame it, instead of the way I learned, by trial and error, just like butchering the shit out of people and seeing the tattoo heal and be like, that didn't work. I need to figure this out. You know, it's unfortunate, but that's the way I did it.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of people who come from that. I know a couple of guys that tattooed out of their house a little bit. And when they were good enough to get a job at a pretty bad place, they went and did that, and then were able to learn there, because even though it was a shitty shop, that some staff had some basic knowledge here and there, and were able to put some stuff together. And that's how they did it. You know,
was that back in the day when you had to work at a shop to even be able to order supplies?
I'm not sure. I don't think so.
That used to be a thing. I mean, it is to some degree still. For a lot of the reputable suppliers won't sell to you unless you either have a license or work in a licensed shop. But I mean, shit, you can order anything on Amazon now and they'll send it right to your house. They don't care.
Oh yeah. There's tons of crap on Amazon and everywhere. Some companies were real hard to get supplies from, and other, like Spalding, didn't ever really give a shit. You know what I mean?
No.
But like National was difficult, you know.
Oh yeah.
Or Lucky. The first time I ordered from Lucky's, I had to send them a copy of a business license. I'd never had to do that before, you know. Which
that's a problem in places that didn't have tattoo licenses, you know.
Yeah, they a business license was good enough, like our city license for the shop or whatever. But yeah, I don't know. I guess that's bad. That's gatekeeping, right?
I don't know. I mean, there's tons of opinions on that at this point. I think as far as supplies go, there's so many suppliers that will sell to anybody. Like, I don't see what the point of trying to pretend that you're not selling to licensed people is. There was one supplier, if I'm not mistaken, that had two storefronts. One was for professionals and one was for anybody, and it was literally the same stuff. It's like anyway, we're getting on a little side topic here.
Man, we've got 3 guys I can think of in Orlando with a van that drive around selling supplies.
Yeah. I mean, they're going to tattoo shops. They're not going to people's houses. Maybe those guys are the legit suppliers, if you think about it, you know.
That's true. Yeah, the one guy's other job is a pizza delivery driver.
Bring you a pizza and some needles, whatever you need.
I tell him that every time. I'm like, why didn't you bring us a pizza?
So I think there's a lot of opinions on who's qualified to train somebody to tattoo. I've heard anything from you have to be tattooing 10 years to 15 years or more. And I don't think that there's an arbitrary number that automatically magically qualifies you to teach somebody. I think some people are good at teaching. Some people are motivated. Some people are great communicators. Some people are patient, nurturing types that can guide somebody without abusing them. And I think those are the kind of things that are way more important than how long you've been in the industry. That being said, I will say that if you're in your first 3 to 5 years of tattooing, I probably don't think you should have an apprentice. Now, there probably are exceptions after 5 years. But again, there has to be a lot of things, in my opinion, that line up. You know, like, are you able to teach somebody? Like, do you have the communication skills and the patience and the knowledge to pass on to somebody? And I saw on a social media post where somebody said, "Hey, I'm thinking about taking on an apprentice. What do you guys do when you train somebody? How do you do it?" And all this. And a lot of the comments, which were all over the place too, a lot of the comments said, if you're asking these questions, you're probably not ready to have an apprentice. Now, that may or may not be true. This person may have already answered these questions for themselves and they want to compare what other people
Right.
are doing. And since there's not a formal, structured, approved, you know, generally approved process, how do you even know if what you're doing is consistent with other people? So I think it's fair to have these conversations, but I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of people that really just get passionate about the subject. And you
Yeah.
know, there's too many people in tattoos and all this. Some of the comments that I read were even like, broken hands can't tattoo, and I was just like, oh, that guy's probably not a good candidate to train somebody to tattoo, you
Good
know.
catchphrase. If you don't know, I'm not going to tell you.
Yeah.
Isn't an answer. It's a
No.
fucking cop out. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
well, it's an opinion. It's like
Yeah.
you know, y- people are afraid of competition, first of all, and I get that.
Oh,
You know,
sure,
like,
sure.
less
Yeah.
competition, the easier it is for you to make money. That's just being lazy, man. If you have
Right.
good competition, that means you got to compete, and that means you got to do a better job, and you got to analyze what you're doing and improve your process. So I think transparency is the best answer for that.
Well, and that's something that you need to teach your apprentice. There's a lot of things beside the technical and artistic aspect of
Yeah.
tattooing that need to be taught. And that's one of the things. There's a lot of myths in tattooing, and there's too many tattooers is one of them. From the beginning, your apprentice needs to understand that they're always going to have to strive
Yeah.
to be a step above the next guy. And if you can't accomplish that with your artistic ability, then you need to be able to accomplish that in other ways, because tattooing is an experience. And the end of that experience is something, a reminder of it that you carry with you for the rest of your life.
Yep.
And you want that to be a great memory,
Yeah.
and that needs to be instilled in your apprentice. So if you're going to be a tattooer, we've established you've got to be patient and understanding. You can't be a fucking bully. You have to have a good grasp of the technical end of tattooing. What makes a good tattoo? Is it going to hold up good over time? And I've been tattooing long enough to where I see like these cycles, this stuff, this garbage that just keeps repeating itself. And all these young people start out doing something stupid, tattoos with no outline,
Right.
and they're doing the whole tattoo. There's no outline, there's no black. And then, 5 or 6 years, that'll go away because they all realize, whoa, if they were right, this doesn't work. And there's exceptions to every rule. Like if you have a high contrast background, you can pull it off. But
Sure.
um,
But I think that goes back to, if you haven't been tattooing over, say, 5 years, like, just to use an
Right.
arbitrary number, you're not seeing your tattoos come back healed
Right.
and seeing them age. So you need to have that perspective in order to really understand what it takes to put a tattoo on that's going to last forever and make your customer happy forever, and not just look good for your Instagram post.
Right. And a part of that comes from being stable and in the same place. If
Yeah.
you're always bouncing around, you're not going to be the best mentor. What are they going to follow you around the country as you try and find that perfect shop that doesn't exist?
Yeah.
I have people that are a couple of years in that come in for a job, and their resume, they worked at more shops than I have.
Yeah. That's crazy.
And it's like, why do you keep moving around? Oh, well, this guy was an asshole, and it's always the other guy. And that might be true, but I don't know, man. I get it. Some people like to move around, but I think in the beginning you need to be in one spot. You can see your stuff come back, and constantly reevaluating what you're doing.
Yes, I agree. Especially if you ever want to take on an apprentice, you really need to have the experience of seeing your tattoos come back and
Yeah,
age and understand how they aged and things like that.
absolutely.
There's a lot of aspects to tattooing that aren't considered when people decide to take on an apprentice, because there's too many people that want to just have a free helper around the shop, a slave, more or less, like take out the trash, sweep up, clean up. Like nobody wants to do those jobs, but somebody that wants to learn how to tattoo will suffer through that shit so they can get a chance. And if you're stringing somebody along, then man, that's bad. That's not the way to do it.
Yeah, well, back before everything was disposable and cartridges, you know, everybody hated scrubbing tubes. You didn't want to scrub your tubes because it's just whatever. It's a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
So, we'll get an apprentice. He'll clean all of our shit.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool, but now you actually have to teach this person. If they're going to work for something, you owe it to them to do that. So I actually worked with a dude that found scrubbing tubes very cathartic. That was like how he wound down. He was the owner of the shop, and you'd come in one morning and he had scrubbed everybody in the 5 different artists' stuff, scrubbed them, bagged them. They were waiting for you to go in the autoclave. You'd be like,
I can see that. I actually don't mind that.
You scrubbed tubes for me once, and I was like, "What's going on, dude? What?"
I don't mind that.
Yeah,
It's part of the job, man. I love all aspects of tattooing. Okay, I love cleaning up after myself, helping out around the shop, selling tattoos. That's another thing. I'll sell tattoos for other people too. I don't care. I love it.
Sure.
You know, that's part of the job, man. I'm not the guy that's like, well, I'm going to do what I do and you do what you do. No, man, it's a team. You know, I want to be a part of that. And I think the same thing goes. If you're going to train somebody to tattoo, you need to train them on all aspects and show them how you can get something out of every part of it. You know, even the parts you don't like. I don't like cleaning the toilet, but you know what? I like having a clean bathroom for my customers and myself.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
because the customers, they're going to judge you and the shop and everything off of that. You know what I mean? You go to someplace and the bathroom's disgusting. Like, there's a grocery store I went into and the bathroom was bad. I was like, ew, if the fucking bathroom is this awful, I don't want to know what the area where they're, you know, packaging the meat looks like. I didn't buy anything.
I could see that.
Like a truck stop bathroom, you know?
So a guy that I worked for in the 90s who's not living anymore, so we could talk about him, I guess. Jim Harris, he owned Artistic Armor in Tampa, and it was a great shop. It was like the shop to work at. They had good artists, multiple locations. Like they hosted the tattoo convention in town in Tampa back in the 90s. And it was, you know, that was the goal. So I got into that shop. And one of the things that he said to me that I always remember is, look at the floor and the ceiling and the bathroom in an establishment. Because if they don't take care of those aspects, the walls and everything, and like everything else, that's what everybody looks at. Look at the ceiling, the floor, and the toilet. If they don't take care of that, then they're not worth a shit. And that's something I always remembered. And I agree. Like if you got ceiling tiles that are falling in and holes in them and water stains and stuff, or half the lights are out, or the tiles all cracked, or the wood floors are scuffed, or whatever, like they don't give a shit. Or the shop's been there forever and whatever, you know. But those are aspects that are important.
Yeah, my mentor said always check the corners.
Oh yeah,
which is essentially the same thing, because if you just sweep real quick, you're not getting the corners.
Yeah.
And when I first moved to Orlando, I walked into a tattoo shop, and they had carpet in the lobby, and that's kind of gross, but you know, whatever.
I remember those days.
Yeah. Well, so they had one of those like March of Dimes candy machines in the lobby, right? You know, you buy the little handful of M&Ms or whatever, and the money goes to charity. And I was looking, and along the baseboards were candy. It was M&Ms and everything. It was the part where when they were vacuuming, the vacuum didn't suck that part up. So they just left it. There was like pennies and candy and dirt and shit. And I was just like, whoa. We actually wound up opening close to that shop, and within 6 months, they really stepped their game up. They were
That's good.
used to being one of the few in that part of town.
No competition. They got lazy.
And sure, and we've got a brand new store that we just built, so everything is squared away. And I have a lot of respect for them because they were like, "Whoa, we need to reevaluate," and
Yeah,
they totally stepped their game up.
that's a good neighbor.
Yeah,
So,
and it's good for the customer.
oh, for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
You're raising a rising tide lifts all boats, right?
Right.
Um, so, going back to teaching tattooing and stuff, um, and teaching other aspects of the business to an apprentice as a mentor. One thing that I noticed in some of the work that I've done down in Cuba, and in Cuba, tattooing is not officially legal. Okay, it's happening there. There is not a open tattoo industry like there's tattoo shops on the street and stuff. There's a couple places that have special exemptions, but generally speaking, people tattoo out of their house there, and artists work by themselves, so they're generally self-taught. And I'm seeing some of the work that these guys are doing. It's just absolutely amazing. So they're have access to some kind of information to see some kind of standards that they can work towards, as far as internet pictures or Instagram or whatever. So we got some of these guys together in Cuba and asked them what some of their concerns were. And obviously getting supplies is difficult there because of the embargo and the government not sanctioning that work. So we discussed some things to deal with that. And another issue that they said was that there's no communication between the artists there. It's so isolated and fragmented. Nobody trusts each other because what they're doing is already illegal. Okay. It's sort of like being in prison and you got a bunch of guys that tattoo in the cell block and they can't really talk to each other because one of them could snitch on the other one and get them in trouble because, Cuba's kind of a prison. So one of the things that we tried to instill in these guys is to communicate with each other and work together and cooperate. And I think that if you're wanting to teach somebody to tattoo, that's an important aspect to teach them, because if they have a good attitude about it and they're helping other artists and improving the guys that they're working with and things like that, it's going to make them better off. If you teach somebody to be suspicious of other people and not trust them and things like that and not share any information, then they're just going to live in a bubble and they're not going to be able to progress as much as somebody that's behaving otherwise. So
Yeah.
I think that's something that's important that should be addressed,
Yeah.
and acknowledged.
I've heard of a couple of shops. There was a place in the 90s and their staff weren't allowed to associate with people from other shops.
Yeah.
They weren't allowed to go get tattooed at other shops. And it's because they didn't want their staff to know what else was out there.
Yep.
The guy was a carny and they're treating people like shit. And they didn't want them to realize it. And recently I heard about a place that was in Orlando, they're gone now, that was like that. I'm like, man, that's crazy.
It is.
You definitely should go meet other tattooers and talk to other tattooers and compare knowledge. Tattooing has traditionally been such a secretive business. You know what I mean? You didn't want to tell anybody anything. And it's a lot different. And in a lot of ways that benefits young tattooers. And I always wanted to hang out and associate with other tattooers because I just loved tattooing so much. It was so rad. And my mentor was, I wasn't not allowed to, but he viewed other tattooers as the enemy.
Sure.
They were the competition trying to take money out of his pocket.
Yep.
And
it was frowned upon.
Yeah. Who else is going to understand you but somebody else, that's in the same business? And tattooing, that's more true in tattooing than anything else. You know what I mean? It is a lifestyle. It is very unique. And so I encourage that. I think that's a good mentor that's going to encourage, your apprentice to talk to other people too. You know what I mean? Yeah. I actually heard one guy tell another guy, hey, stop that. That's my apprentice. It's like, dude, anything this kid learns, as long as it's the right information, is going to benefit him. Don't
Yeah.
get all weird and territorial. You know what I mean?
Possessive.
Yeah, that was weird. I was like, that you need to fucking stop that now.
Yeah.
A major thing that is overlooked a lot with apprentices, and something that as a mentor you need to have a grasp of and be able to teach them. And I overlooked this for a long time too. Is the financial end of tattooing, and being responsible with your money.
Yeah.
If you life is real different when you're a 1099 and independent contractor. You're responsible for your own taxes.
Yep.
I've seen a lot of young tattooers at the end of the year are just fucked because they never saved any money. Nobody told them they needed to save, and now they got a tax bill due, and they're gonna have to start making payments on it.
Yeah.
And saving for next year.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so they need to save money and receipts.
Yes. And you know, we have a slow season, so you've got to be ready for that too. They all go buy new toys during tax season.
Of course.
And then September rolls around, and they're selling those, you know, fancy guitars and whatever else they fucking bought.
Yeah.
Putting it in the pawn shop, you know. But yeah, understanding how the business works, how money works, what it means to be 1099 versus employee. And I'm not saying, you know, any of us are qualified to give tax advice, but just, you know, it's always a good idea to tell somebody to save money. And that's a huge downfall of tattoo schools. I've had people come out of the tattoo school and have no idea how it works, or even that it's a fucking commission only job.
What do they expect to get paid hourly? Salary? What?
Yes. There's a big company that is well known, and they're in every mall in America for doing ear piercing.
Yeah.
And this company decided that it was going to be a good idea for them to get into body piercing, and they started another company, and they opened body piercing studios in malls across the country. And they had commercials that I saw, like on YouTube, ads, and these piercers talking about how much they loved it because they had a stable, steady paycheck. And I know a piercer that went to one of these places just to check it out, and it was $15 an hour is what they were paying their piercers. Well, for most piercers, that's not what they would make in a good, busy shop. Right. They'd make a lot more in a good shop, but there's no motivation to hustle. None whatsoever. I mean, if you're getting the same, whether you do one piercing or 5 piercings in an hour, fuck it, you know?
Yep.
And I don't even know if they're still in existence.
I'm not familiar with that existing anywhere now. I know that different states have different laws, and that could have been regulated out of markets that I'm familiar with, but I'm not familiar with
Orlando fairly recently.
Huh. I didn't even know about that. That's crazy.
Yep.
That's
so you also have to teach your apprentice to be motivated and to hustle.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of tattooers that they don't have that themselves. They can't instill it into somebody else. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Having an apprentice isn't a way to feed your ego. It's not a way.
It shouldn't be.
No. And if you are getting an apprentice because you want a sycophant, that's going to go badly for you. That person will eventually realize that, and you're gonna wind up with the opposite.
I think the best reason to be motivated to have an apprentice, in my opinion, is so that you can create another good tattooer and give back to the industry something that you know it deserves. I personally want anybody I train to be better than me.
Oh, and, absolutely.
I mean, I know that's a low bar, but I want people that I work with to be better than me. And you know, that's the way I look at it. I want them to be more successful. I want them to be better artists, and I want them to be what's right about tattooing. You know, there's plenty of things wrong with tattooing, and I don't want to be a contributing factor to that. So I want whoever, you know, I'm training to be better.
Sure.
So,
Yeah. I want to teach somebody that's going to benefit the industry. I'm trying to protect this thing of ours.
yeah,
You know what I
yeah,
mean? And people need to learn should learn the history of tattooing
sure.
and how we got to where we're at. You know, because it wasn't always easy. It wasn't easy having a tattoo shop or being heavily tattooed. It
Yeah,
was hard to get landlords to rent
yep,
to you and stuff like that. And people become disillusioned. I remember when we opened our first store in a mall,
yeah,
and there was tattooers that were so mad about that. The tattoo
yep,
shop shouldn't be in a
yep,
mall. And
yep.
one of them was like, Sailor Jerry is rolling in his grave right now. And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? I was like, if they had malls back then and he would have been allowed to open in one, he absolutely would have done it.
Yeah,
His
yeah,
shop was on Hotel Street. It was the busiest fucking street
yep,
there.
yep,
And guys put tattoo shops in the busiest
yep,
places that they could get into, like
yep,
the Bowery or the Pike, or Coney Island. You know what I
yep,
mean? Some busy spot with tons of people. So
yep.
the whole what tattooing was, there's a lot of misconceptions, and I think that it's important if you're going to teach somebody to teach them the history.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know?
those tattoo shops were in busy spots, and then tattooing got a bad reputation.
Yeah.
Especially like in New York City, where there was like Eddie and Stan and all those old legends up there. They got legislated out, and
Right.
then they had to go kind of underground. They left New York City, or they went to some spot where they could operate out of the public eye because, of the issues, that the public health concerns and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it kind of went underground.
Yeah.
And that's what most people have a recent memory of, the kind of back alley, old school tattooing, the biker, antisocial stuff. And that's not where it came from.
No.
That's where it went. And then it's coming back now. And I
Yeah.
think once the stuff was on TV, that's when everything changed, the internet too, obviously, but the TV is what really put tattooing in people's living rooms and made it to where anybody could just take a look at it. You didn't have to walk into some sketchy shop with some surly people in there. It was safe. You could just be in your living room. There you go. There's tattooing. So
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a cyclical thing.
Yeah. Well, at one point, tattooing was something for the extremely wealthy.
Yeah.
They were the only ones that had access to it.
Yeah.
You would fly some Japanese master or have him get on a ship. Not fly. They weren't flying then, but you get this master to come to where you were at, to you and your friends, and that was a big deal. You had to be rich, and that changed when you had all these sailors traveling the world, and then they had access to tattoos. And the sailors, they're looked down upon, and the dock workers are just they're looked down upon. And
they were not high society.
Those were guys that were sailors at one point, and so then it became something where people looked down on it because of the type of people that had access to it. That's a whole other podcast. We'll get into that, but
anyway,
is important, and
it is,
like you said, how tattooing, these guys were legislated out. I mean, tattooing was illegal in New York City until the 90s. And it's important to teach young people that history, because the government can certainly do that again.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, what was the most recent legalized state? Oklahoma or South Carolina?
Oh,
South Carolina was up there too. Those were the last two that I remember. And that was in the 2000s, if I'm not mistaken, right? Yeah, for sure. Oklahoma was.
Yeah. Wasn't Virginia Beach? You couldn't tattoo on the beach there, and
there's probably a lot of city and local ordinances, but I meant on a state level.
Yeah. So that could happen again, I guess.
Well, getting back to the topic of the mentor and apprentice who's qualified to teach somebody to tattoo. One of the things that I was thinking about is the commitment of every aspect of what we're doing. So to get a tattoo is a lifelong commitment, generally speaking. I mean, most people don't get their tattoos removed. So when you get a tattoo, it's there forever. That's a big deal. And that's something that keeps a lot of people from doing it. And that's fine. You know, like people are saying, oh, I want a tattoo, but I don't know if I want that forever. Like, well, then you probably don't, you know,
Right. It
it's
ain't for
fine.
everybody.
So getting a tattoo is a lifelong commitment. Then becoming a tattooer, that's really a lifelong commitment too. I mean, you're never going to finish learning about tattooing. As soon as you get one aspect of it, you know, under control, not master, but you know, you're like, I feel confident in this aspect. You learn another part of the business, another aspect of the process. And then you're like, man, I got to start all over. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. So that's another big commitment. And then the next step is you're going to teach somebody what you know. And that's a huge commitment because you have to be confident in what you're doing and understand what you don't know too, right? Because
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, there's certain aspects of tattooing that I can't teach somebody. I could teach them how to learn it maybe. Like,
Right.
hey, I can't tattoo like that, but I can tattoo and this is what I know. You can apply this and figure that part out for yourself. I mean, it goes back to the quote you said, that I guess you made up. It says you never really finish your apprenticeship. You just get to the point where you don't have to have somebody over your shoulder.
Right.
And I mean, that's part of being being qualified to teach somebody to tattoo is understanding where you're at and everything. So
yeah, for sure. You can't be, there's a lot of people that are really full of themselves. I mean, I think all tattooers to a certain extent are. You've gotta come off as confident with your customers. So I guess we're by nature kind of cocky, but you need to understand, like you said, where you're at and the limits of your abilities. And so you can properly teach somebody. You're gonna have to kind of there's gonna be some self-reflection. And you know, are you comfortable with all aspects or of tattooing? And I'm not saying can you do portraits or can you do this or that, like that's not important. You should be competent and you should be able to articulate what it is you're doing and why you're doing it, and recognize what is causing mistakes. Like I can look at something and be like, yeah, you weren't stretching the skin enough.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I can tell exactly. I can tell you need, or look at it and be like, you need to slow down when you're packing color or whatever. And if you can't look at a tattoo and see what's causing those mistakes, you're not there yet, you know? And it is a huge responsibility. It is a major commitment, like you said. It takes a lot of time and effort. Do you have the time to teach somebody? Are you always traveling? Are you always doing conventions? Another thing is your apprentice is going to have to start doing some tattoos. Do you have enough business in your shop for them to tattoo, to learn? And I could probably catch some heat over this, but I think if you're a one-man operation with a private studio that doesn't have walk-ins, it's going to be really difficult for your apprentice. You know, they better have a lot of friends. And even then, once they're at a point where they can start charging people, is there going to be enough business at your private studio for them to get walk-ins? Because you've got to be continually tattooing so you can progress.
Yeah.
So I think those are big things to consider if you're going to teach somebody. So
I don't know, Jack, what else you think there is to discuss on this?
I don't know. I think we've kind of covered everything. Like you said earlier, there's not like a whole lot like the other, like getting an apprenticeship. I think there's a little bit more involved there. But you know, I think it's important to be selective. If you're going to take on an apprentice, like make sure it's a good person. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
we don't need another fucking shitbag in tattooing. We
No.
don't need, somebody that's going to be creepy with the opposite sex or
Right.
anything like that. Like, be selective. This ain't for everybody. And some people have no business interacting with the general public. So,
I just thought of something. Tell me about a failure that you've had with an apprentice, something that didn't work out. If you can think of something. I know that I've learned that making everything crystal clear and all expectations and obligations understood before executing the agreement is important. I've heard a lot of people say, well, I trained this person and they're supposed to work here for a year and they got another job offer making more money or whatever, so they're leaving. Like, is this the first time you've experienced that? Because I've been through that, and I know now that if I'm going to train somebody, it needs to be crystal clear what the expectations and obligations are, and they need to be realistic. Like, you can't tell somebody you can't work for anybody else for 500 miles from my shop for 5 years. Like, that's not going to hold up. That's ridiculous. But
Right.
you can say you're not going to operate within whatever the law allows where you are. Maybe it's 5 miles or 6 miles or whatever. You can't steal my customer list. I mean, these are things that are legally enforceable. If you have some ridiculous agreement with somebody like, hey, you can't tattoo for 500 miles for 5 years. That's you're not being reasonable. That's not going to work. So that's people need to be realistic.
Yeah, I have had once or twice, and I've learned that if I even have like the slightest little bit of a feeling that this person's not going to make it, they're probably not.
Yeah.
I have had people leave because they didn't realize how hard it was going to be. Not, some people just don't take direction well or cannot handle constructive criticism.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest thing. There is a way to tell somebody that they're making a mistake and how to fix it without being a jerk. You've got to have, if you're going to have an apprentice, you've got to have the right temperament to be able to offer constructive criticism, to be able to help somebody, point out that they're fucking up in a positive way, and it's hard for some people to hear that, especially when all of their friends and family have been telling them how wonderful and what a good drawer they are their whole life,
and for sure.
You can just, like, there's been a couple where I was like, ooh, I don't know, this one seems like they might be a little too fragile for this. And they were.
Well, I think also if you're training somebody, you need to understand how to give criticism, because different people are going to react differently to different methods of communication, right? Some people you can say, hey, you're doing that wrong, do it like this. And they're like, fine, no problem, I got it. Other people, you might be able to say, what the hell are you doing? You're not listening to me. People respond differently. Sometimes that's okay. Sometimes people need to be talked to that way. Everybody's personality is different, and as an instructor, you need to be able to read that person and understand, what is the best method of communication for this individual.
Yeah. We had an apprentice, and me and one of the other guys, we're trying to talk to this kid to get him to understand, be like, hey man, this is what you're doing wrong. And he would immediately go back to doing the exact same thing. And one of the other guys took him outside and screamed at him for 10 minutes. And we didn't have that problem anymore.
Yeah.
And it was just like, that's what he needed,
Yeah. And then that's not necessarily bullying. It's just different forms of communication work differently with people, I mean, he wasn't humiliated, apparently. You took him outside and had a good talk with them. So that's something I think if you're going to consider teaching somebody how to tattoo, do you understand how to communicate with people critically?
That's a great point.
Complimentary. Everybody that's a good tattooer knows how to sell tattoos and praise and, build somebody up. But at the same time, can you reel somebody in and say, hey, you're doing this wrong and here's why and here's what you need to do without, being abusive?
Yeah, I'm now have to make it very clear, like what kind of environment they're walking into, and that when it's busy, it can be stressful.
Yeah.
So are you the kind of person that can handle that? Can you handle a lobby full of people and all of them trying to get your attention at the same time?
And a shop full of artists that are
Right.
asking you, hey, set me up, break me down, take my trash out, get me a cup of coffee, all at the same time. I mean, you're getting it from both ends.
And you got to be able to handle that. I have found that people that already are coming from some kind of customer service job, they've got it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like if they
dealing with the public is the hardest,
sure,
thing to get a handle on.
Yeah.
Because it has to happen quick.
Yeah. We had somebody that came from I don't remember which one, but like a super, super, super busy clothing store in a huge mall full of tourists. And they were like, man, you've got people yelling at you in 3 different languages. And there's always that kid that keeps unfolding the shirts that you just folded. So you're folding shirts, you're answering questions, you're trying to figure out what this person's saying and what language they're speaking. And they were great. They were so good at wrangling customers. It was outstanding.
That's important.
Sure. Yeah. Customer service. We've said that over and over again, but man, I can't stress it enough. And like when you're critiquing somebody's artwork, art's subjective. That's an opinion,
Yeah.
But tattooing is a technical skill.
Yep.
And you've got to be able to critique that. I had not that long ago an apprentice, after I explained to them what they were doing wrong, she went, yeah, I guess I agree with your assessment. And I was like, well, I don't give a shit if you agree or not. This is how you need to do it if you want the end result to look good, Otherwise, all that line work's going to fall out, you know?
Yeah. Well, that reminds me of a story when I was interacting with a younger tattooer. He wasn't an apprentice, but definitely, in their first 5 years or so. And I was like, hey, you need to do this, you need to do that. These are what the expectations are. This is how you need to do this. And the guy says, I didn't get into this business to follow rules. And I was like, you don't think there's rules to this?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you don't have to wear a suit and tie to work, but you need to be here when you say you're going to be here. You need to be nice to people. And you need to put on good tattoos. Those are fucking rules.
Yeah.
Like people have crazy ideas about what they think tattooing is. Like, art is subjective. Tattooing is a technical skill that is not subjective. If you're not putting lines in correctly, applying the shading and color correctly, that can be objectively pointed out.
I didn't get into tattooing to blank. I've heard them all. It's amazing. I didn't get into this so I'd have to punch a clock. It's like, dude, I'm just telling you not to show up an hour late.
Yeah.
But, I'm not asking you.
There's a customer waiting for you.
Yeah.
You said you would be here.
Yeah. I'm awful about being on time. I'm certainly not going to rip into somebody for being 15 minutes late. But when your customer's been waiting an hour, like
that's not acceptable.
Tattooing, there's a lot of freedoms with tattooing, and that's definitely cool. That's not why I got into it either. I got into it because tattooing was so cool, so mysterious, and antisocial.
Yeah, I was gonna say I got into it because it was bad. I wanted to be bad.
Exactly. It's like, I wanted to be the guy your mom warned you about. You know what I mean? So yeah. Unfortunately, I have been that guy. So, but I'm married to the daughter of a tattooer, so it works out.
Oh yeah. I think your father-in-law knew what he was in for.
Oh yeah.
when he married his daughter off to you. So I think maybe the most important thing you can say about somebody that is going to take on an apprentice and mentor them and teach them how to tattoo is that they absolutely have to love tattooing. I mean, that's all there is to it. They have to love tattooing and all the things that it means to love tattooing. You have to respect it. You have to honor it. You have to protect it, and you have to want what's best for it. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. So,
yeah, for sure. It's hard. And you've got to put in the work, you know what I mean? And that's what makes it so rewarding. And it is a job. I think that's something that people are a little disillusioned by. It's a job, you know.
Yeah, it's a business. There's expectations. Your customers expect something. Your colleagues expect something. Your boss expects something. Like whoever we're talking about, the health department that's inspecting you, they expect something. There's fucking rules to this.
It is a business. It's an industry, and I know that really ruffles some feathers. Some people are bummed out by that, but that's what it is. We've all got to eat. We've all got to pay the bills, you know.
I posted something on social media one day asking a question in one of those groups, and it said, I said something about the tattoo industry. You know, what do you think about this? And one of the responses was, well, the fact that you called it an industry tells me everything I need to know. And I was just like, the business? What do you want me to call it? Like, you tattoo for free? Like, I don't get it. You know, there's a money exchange. That's business. That means there's an industry. That's how that's what these words mean.
Sure. Of course it's an industry, because there are other businesses that have came into existence to support tattooing.
Yeah. And that's happening more and more now. I'm seeing more and more people that are offering professional services for tattooers, financial planning, marketing, all these things. You know, this is definitely an industry.
Yes, people are developing and marketing point of sale programs specifically towards tattooers. That's a big one. You know what I mean?
Because those are people outside of our industry. The stuff that I mentioned before are generally tattooers that figured out a little thing. Hey, I'm good at saving money and making money and investing, so I'm going to teach other tattooers how to do this, which I think is great. I mean, that's a great way to give back to tattoo, and I support that.
I agree. I do fully support that. I think that a lot of tattooers need to learn that. I was shocked during COVID to find out how many tattooers I knew that weren't paying taxes, hadn't been paying taxes.
Well, I mean, I wasn't shocked at that. I was saddened by the fact that those individuals had to suffer a lot more than people that didn't, you know, choose to take that route. But you know, it is what it is. I certainly wasn't shocked by it. There's plenty of pirates left in the business, you know.
Yeah. But that goes to you know, those people, their mentor didn't explain to them some things about the business, you know. And I've been guilty of that in the past too, not making sure somebody understands that. Yes, trust me, I'm not pro taxes at all, but you got to do it. You know what I mean? The government will take everything you want.
Or you got to figure out how to not pay them legally. That's the trick.
Sure. And there's definite, you know, ways to pay less, you know. If you're a 1099 you know, contractor, then there's a lot of options to pay less in taxes, and you should be taking advantage of all of them.
Yeah, but you need to educate yourself on that.
Yeah. But you know, that's part of being a good mentor. If you're going to take an apprentice on, you've got to be prepared to help them with all of this. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Don't set them up for failure.
You want the person you train to be your legacy.
Yeah, for sure. And that's important.
Yeah. It's like having a child.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think
I think we've covered everything at this point.
Yeah. So,
all right, man. Nice talking to you. I'll see you soon.
All right, man.
Thank you. That's it for this episode of I Love Tattooing. Sure hope you enjoyed it. Please check out our website, ilovetattooing.com, and leave us a comment or send us a suggestion. If there's a topic you'd like to hear us discuss or you want to give us some feedback, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. See you next time.